Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama Podcast, episode 28. Today, our guest is John Devanny. He holds a Ph.D. in American history from the University of South Carolina. He resides in Front Royal, Virginia, where he teaches at Christendom College, writes, tends garden, and occasionally escapes to bird hunt or fly fish. Dr. Devanny is also a stockjobber, so his essays and presentations often deal with political economy and its intersections with history and current events. His work can be found at the Imaginative Conservative, Reckonin, and the Abbeville Institute. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me, Rebecca. I do appreciate it.
Well, I have been a fan of your writing for a while. I've been mostly following you at Abbeville, but I was blown away by your lecture that you gave at the Abbeville conference in Charleston back in October, entitled Who Owns America Today? So I'm actually going to be linking to that, like in the lead up, high up in the show notes page is probably going to be the feature image, because I really want people to hear that. I thought I was a pretty smart, well-versed person, but you told me things in there that were just quite amazing. So we're going to get to some of that. It's very detailed, so I really want to urge folks to watch it all. We'll parse out some of that, but first I want to kind of get to know your philosophy and who you are as a person before we dive into some of those details. So where are you from? Is it Southern Maryland?
Well, I was born in Baltimore City in 1964 and grew up in Anne Arundel County in a little town called Linthicum. So we were at the northern edge of Southern Maryland. Southern Maryland's considered to be the five counties of Anne Arundel, Charles, Culver, St. Mary's County, and occasionally they'll throw Prince George's in there, but not so much anymore. Patapsco Valley, where I grew up, was at one time the main recruiting ground for the 1st and 2nd Maryland Cavalry. So if you go through old rosters of Maryland Confederates, you'll see names like Hammond and Harwood and Dorsey. Lee's aide, Henry Marshall, lived maybe 5 miles as the bird flies from where I grew up in the valley in that time. Today, not so much. It's changed dramatically, and Southern Maryland has probably retreated down to Culver County, St. Mary's, Southern Charles County, maybe Southern Anne Arundel as well at this point in time. But that's where I grew up, and it was always an area that was known as the more so-called redneck area of the Baltimore suburbs. Or the term that was often used to describe people like me was grits, because we were considered to be gritty, and that's also generally what was eaten down in our neck of the woods. But it was a good place to grow up. Lots of opportunities to fish, hunt, a lot of good people there, and has, like many places in the South, has changed dramatically over time.
Yeah, I'm from Richmond originally, lived the first 24 years of my life there. And it's funny, before I kind of got back in touch with my Southern roots, we just figured, oh, Maryland is just a bunch of Yankees. And this was the 80s and 90s, because I'll date myself. I was born in 71. I'll be 50 this year. We thought Northern Virginia was Yankees even back in the 80s. We called it Nova, right?
Sure.
But it's very Southern. It used to be very Southern. And I just kind of wanted you to explain that, because a lot of people just don't get that connection, that Maryland is very much used to be a Southern place. Have you ever left Maryland and lived elsewhere?
Well, indeed.
Virginia now. Yeah.
South Carolina, North Carolina, now Virginia. So I've lived all over the Southeast, and the coastal regions and the Piedmont and what have you. With Maryland and Virginia, it's really what turned Maryland was DC. And Joyce Bennett, who also writes for Chronicles, and she writes for the Abbeville Institute as well. She's from St. Mary's County. She's chronicled this very well, that after World War II, we begin to see the first major migrations into Maryland, into the Northern Virginia suburbs. And all is well at first. Many of these are good, hardworking people. Some of them are coming down to work in the new industries like Westinghouse out by the airport at BWI, or in the military industrial complex. But over time, you just have this wave after wave. It got so in the state of Maryland that by the mid 90s, hardly any of the people sitting in the General Assembly had been in the state for more than a generation or two.
Yeah.
And you run into old Maryland families everywhere all the time. But Maryland, people forget, it was the third colony settled.
Mhm.
Along Southern Maryland, there are a lot of ties between Marylanders and Virginians in the Tidewater area, ties of
Mhm.
kinship and things of this nature. And in many ways, it's what Marylanders would often laugh and say, well, Virginia has its first families, but everybody knows we were the real aristocracy because many of the Catholics who came over actually did have titles of nobility. They weren't second sons. They were often at times first sons and things of this nature. And in some respects, Maryland was a much more aristocratic planting state. I'd say up to about the 1830s or 1840s when Baltimore begins to really take off as a major industrial town. The cool thing about Maryland, though, is it's very much the border state. You've got 4 or 5 different accents in the state. In Baltimore City alone, you can tell what part of town somebody grew up on by the way they pronounce the name of the city. So it really does have those border flavors in the way that Kentucky does, West Virginia, Missouri, along those lines. But many, many Marylanders, and I was stunned by this, in the latest census in 2010, nearly 30% of Marylanders still identify themselves as Southern.
Nice. Yeah,
Which is
that's
very neat.
amazing.
I'm
Yeah.
amazed at this point because it's the population has changed so much.
I would say in Richmond, I don't know if that even flies there. But and then looking into the history and knowing why Maryland didn't secede, I guess because Abraham Lincoln put everybody in jail, they just couldn't pull it off.
Oh, absolutely. You're under military occupation from the beginning. You had a governor who was unionist leaning, a legislature, yeah, many of whom ended up in jail, including, ironically, the nephew of Francis Scott Key.
Right.
And the Howards were close family members, so a lot of the Howards, old war hero family, were also placed in jail as well. But you still have about 26,000 Marylanders who make their way south to fight for the Confederacy.
Mhm.
There's about 42,000 or so who fight for the Union, but of that 42,000 or so, many of those people are immigrants who've recently come in, or Northerners from other states who are put into Maryland regiments, or they're members of the equivalent of the National Guard of the day. This was how you kept from being cannon fodder. You join the Home Guard, and hopefully they don't send you down. That changed for those fellas, of course,
Right.
by the time that Cold Harbor and the Grant campaigns against Richmond were initiated, because he needed cannon fodder at that point. But Maryland was very much divided in its loyalties. And really, John Randolph, the great Virginia statesman, his southern border was always the Patapsco River. South of the Patapsco, in his mind, was the South. North of it was the North. So, but you find this in Missouri, Virginia, and parts of Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky as well.
Yes, and the accent part's very interesting too, because when I'm traveling around Virginia in the 80s, people knew I was from Richmond. It was really strange. I'd go to Blacksburg and visit friends at Virginia Tech, and they would just say, "You're from Richmond, aren't you?" I don't know what the heck kind of accent I have now. I lived for a while in Wisconsin and Colorado, and I married a Texan, so I don't know what I sound like now. But back then, people knew what part of the state you were from.
You
So
still have the Tidewater O, though. I mean,
know.
this is something that everybody shares in the Chesapeake, all the way down to the Hoyt-Hoyters down in North Carolina, and into Charleston as well. You can tell a southern coastal accent by the way they pronounce those.
Yeah, we spent our summers on the Rappahannock River in Deltaville. We had a summer home there, so that may go back to that. All right, so you lived in South Carolina too, because you went to the University of South Carolina. Clyde Wilson is one of my heroes, like he is to so many people. A lot of people think he's one of the greatest, the greatest living American historians still at this point. Brian McClanahan has talked about when he went there, how rigorous it was. I mean, you couldn't just be some chump in off the street.
Yes.
Can you just give us a little glimpse for all of us, Dr. Wilson fanboys, like what it was like learning under him?
Clyde is an outstanding director of graduate students. There's no doubt about it. His grasp of the sources is incredible. What he was really talented at and what he understood, and this is just not understood in the American Academy, is, as he told me, this is the last chance that you will ever have to read everything that you can possibly get your hands on. Do not limit yourself to your specialty. So Clyde would encourage all of us to go to economics conferences. So I would go up to the public choice seminars at George Mason, over to Auburn University, where the von Mises Institute was located just off campus. I did a field in Southern literature. Some of the other graduate students in Clyde would do a field in philosophy, so we wouldn't just all have history fields. And we read and read and read. I mean, Clyde's motto tended to be read, 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 scribble, scribble, scribble in your writing. His knowledge, depth, breadth was incredible. He kept up on the reading of the enemies. And he was the one professor, ironically, as a conservative, who could talk intelligently on post-structuralism and deconstruction, because he actually took the time to read these people rather than to read about them, which frankly is often what happens in the university. In the seminars, for instance, many of the graduate students that I worked with would often just read the book reviews rather than the books themselves for the upcoming seminar discussion. And what was unique about Clyde's students, since he really inculcated a love of reading in all of us and the necessity of it, even our liberal professors loved having his students in there because we read the books and we engaged with it. And when the seminar got boring, we would be happy to throw a bomb into the conversation to get things going again. So we had a lot of fun at the University of South Carolina. Columbia is a lovely town. I mean, the summer is torrid. It's like the never-ending July in Virginia and Maryland. However, it's a wonderful town and a great place to go to a university. Wonderful library. I mean, the Thomas Cooper Library, the Carolina Library, they're top 50, top 5 for the Carolina for Southern sources. Cooper, I think Cooper is ranked like the 30th best college library, university library in the country. Outstanding places to do research. And so Clyde was wonderful in that respect, very supportive of his students, a lot of gravitas, highly respected by the very best in the field. Man who was a historian's historian is the way I would put it.
Yeah, that's amazing. What year did you graduate?
I finished up my dissertation in 2000, I believe.
Okay. Just to kind of
So
give people a feel.
I had left the university to take a teaching job, I think around 1998, and just finished up the dissertation while I was teaching.
Okay. So you study what seems to me to be kind of trends. Would you say that's fair to say? You study trend analysis. And I feel as if there are so many inescapable trends that are happening, and some people either refuse to see them or haven't taken the time to notice. So we're going to dive into some of these. So at your lecture at the Abbeville conference, you said, I believe, pull your children. No, maybe this was in the article. Either way, you can tell me where it comes from. Pull your children out of government schools and encourage others to do likewise. Homeschool, or if you send your child to a private school, scrutinize their faculty and curriculum. If the college or university your child attends or which you attended has embraced Marxism or wokeness, and nearly all of them have, cut them off from any donations and let them know why, and encourage other alumni to do so as well. Under no circumstances, send your child to a woke college. That actually just came from your most recent Abbeville piece, I think.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
So anyway, that one is called, I think, What Can We Do Now? But I kind of want to dive into that because I think this is kind of surprising advice coming from somebody who's a current professor. You've been a dean, right? At like a Catholic
yes,
school?
academic dean and faculty dean at independent schools and Catholic schools.
So I've been homeschooling since day one, and I'd like to say my kids have never darkened the doorstep of a government school. I don't even have, college savings funds for my kids. So I want you to tell us why this is your advice, because, I have a lot of homeschoolers that follow my show and moms and dads, and tell us why this is what your advice is.
Good. I have something to offend everybody, including homeschoolers, and I'm a homeschooling dad as well. We homeschool our children through as well. The advice is for this reason: where the schools are at today, it's gone beyond even indoctrination. Even if you put your child in an independent school, even some of the Christian schools, many of the Catholic schools, they had a very strong left-leaning liberal bent. And there tended to be more and more of an emphasis on, we want you to learn the correct things to believe, and now the correct things to feel. We want you to have certain emotional responses to what you see going around you. And so what has happened over the last, I would say the last 3 decades, going back to about 1990, slowly but surely, Intellectual formation is no longer the main task that many schools see themselves committed to. What they're committing themselves to is trying to shape the emotional responses of children. So some evidence. If you go onto the site of the National Association of Independent Schools, you will see that they have 4 pillars that support their reason for existence. One of those pillars is excellence, and under excellence, they have everything from band to art to academics. But an entire pillar alone, all by its lonesome, is emotion. That is incredible to me. Yeah. Now, this is the association for the very best schools in the United States. The other problem that we have going on right now is that the folks who are now the senior teachers and who are becoming administrators are late Gen Xers and early millennials, folks in their 30s to early 40s. All of these folks have come up through education systems that have stripped them of any kind of real intellectual formation, uses of evidence, what kinds of evidence are we dealing with, have we cross-referenced, have we verified? You don't do those kinds of things anymore. And so everything is now geared towards what is the proper fashionable response that I take, even if it's counterfactual. Again, an example at the college level. Recently, the director of graduate studies for history at the University of Rhode Island had stated on a tweet that facts and data are racist. And they're racist because they come from a racist society. Okay, let's give them that for the moment, but here's the irony. If the society is so racist that even the facts and the data it produces are racist, then wouldn't a certain individual who's the director of graduate studies be nothing more than the product of a racist system himself, since he's holding power and authority within that system? That's how absurd it's gotten, is that our opponents can't even think logically or coherently. So their attitude tends to be, well, logic and coherence and reason are actually the problem.
Right.
But since I feel a certain way, this must be the way that these things are. So if you want your children to unleash their emotions, which, as the old Catholic moralists like St. Alphonse Liguori and St. Francis de Sales would tell you is the devil's playground, by all means, go to it. But you're not in most schools today. This would be most Catholic schools, many Christian schools, most non-denominational, non-sectarian independent schools. You're not going to receive anything that is anywhere near the intellectual formation that you're expecting your child to receive. And I've seen this in homeschoolers as well. When my wife and I first started homeschooling, many of the families did it because we knew we could give a much more rigorous education to our children than what they would receive in the local independent school, Catholic school, or the local government schools. We began to see as our children got older, and our last one is 21, so he graduated about 4 years ago. But in the last 10 years, we've seen this trend in homeschooling that, that's really rough. It's really rough for me to give up that time to sit down and go through Jacob's geometry or to go through the logic lessons with my kid and to really form them. We'll just read stories. And even when I've been teaching, when I have a student who comes out of a homeschool, they're either fantastic or it's a pathetic situation where the homeschooler will say to me, I'm so sorry we never wrote. My mother just read books to us. And it's like, okay, well, that's a good thing to do, but that shouldn't be the only thing to do. So it's a very strong cultural trend that's in place, and it's only getting worse. I don't see the trend reversing at this point. I don't know what will make it reverse, but we really are just embracing this idea that emotions should be our guide to things. And there are certain appropriate emotional responses and some that are not. And Lord knows, they switch on a dime. You can look at the responses to the treatments for COVID. We were all told that, oh no, hydroxychloroquine is awful. It's terrible. Panic in the streets. Now we're being told, no, it's a wonder drug. It's great. And there's this incredible lack of self-reflection that people have regarding, well, shouldn't we have just looked at the data instead of gone off the rocker on this?
Right.
But that is why I would say there's a second reason, and that is most schools are not going to make the demographic collapse. Millennials are not forming families. Right now, Gen X kids are the ones who are, the Z kids are coming from Gen X parents. They dominate the enrollments. But with the older millennials in their mid-30s, they're beginning to dominate the elementary school enrollments. And we are seeing them plummet all over the place. Wow. And of course, COVID has contributed to a small bump in these enrollments because with the government schools closing down, people got desperate. I've got to get my kid out of the house. But as soon as that goes back to some level of normalcy, we're going to continue to see this problem of shrinking enrollments for private school educations and Christian school educations that are more and more expensive. So if I was a parent today, I would definitely take a real hard look at the curriculum. I would really pepper them on, okay, what is it that you want your graduates to know and to be able to do intellectually when they leave here? And the second thing I would say is, let's talk finances here. What's your debt? What's your endowment? You have to take a real close look because education's labor intensive and it's capital intensive. And most schools that were started in the last 30, 40 years have bought depreciating capital with debt. And they don't really have the endowment. And you need the endowment because it's impossible to make ends meet off of the tuition, especially at the high school level where all the teachers are specialists and you're expected to provide all these extracurricular activities, athletics, and things of this nature. So I would really pay close attention to the financial health of the school as well. Because I think in the next 10 years, we're going to be stunned at the numbers of colleges and the numbers of independent schools, Catholic schools. It's actually already happening with Catholic schools. They've been declining since 1970. And even Christian academies, we're going to see more and more closures as enrollments shrink. We do have a demographic problem. And as the great economist Lacey Hunt points out, it's not overpopulation. The problem is lack of population growth. Yeah. And if you want a good economy, if you want innovation, you got to have people. And having people beyond their peak earning years and innovative years isn't going to get you there. And that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and I find much of what you say, and homeschooling, I guess this is maybe my 9th year. I have twins that are 12 and big brother is 13 and a half. And we've done co-ops and all that kind of thing. And, pre-packaged curriculum, we're finally kind of doing our own thing now. I kind of go my eclectic route. I do a lot of different things. We do the reading of books, but we do logic too. Logic is a tool of the patriarchy, so we grab onto that, but, we say that kind of in jest, but I mean, I find this in like classical homeschool stuff that they're kind of going the, diversity by force and, social justice. Susan Wise Bauer, who wrote Story of the World. It's this great, wonderful thing that everybody does. She went to William and Mary. She gives all these conferences. I mean, she's talking about social justice and how we need to walk in other people's shoes, not to experience, different aspects of life and different cultures, but specifically kind of because, I guess white people got work to do or something. I don't even know. And it's really scary because she was kind of a stalwart for a long time. So it's freaking out a lot of people. And so you've got that happening. And then on the flip side, you have that January 6th, the coup it's all because everybody's homeschooled. So on one hand, I think they're going to be coming. I guess the regime is going to be coming after homeschooling. And on the flip side, half the homeschoolers are kind of woke too. So it's just a really weird time to be alive. Do you see some of that going on? I mean, I guess your kids aren't in co-ops and stuff anymore. They're all out of the house, but just following kind of what people are knowing besides lacking academics coming in from homeschool backgrounds. Do you see any of that where they're kind of woke?
Well, the larger trend that I see is that, I hate to say this, but it's simply true. Most people are sheep. Most people really are very social animals. They really want to connect with other people. And culture is a very powerful thing. I'll give an example. At the Catholic schools that I've taught, many of these Catholic schools, colleges have been known as very conservative colleges. And so when you begin to read like St. Anthony in the Desert, you read St. Augustine, what have you, you've got to understand these people as they understand themselves. And I had this one cute little student tell me one time that, oh, well, St. Augustine in the Confessions, he's just trying to talk about how he got better and did better. I said, wait, darling, he's not Jordan Peterson. It's not like, oh, I started making my bed in the morning and then
Clean your room.
right? This is a man who believes that his three deadliest enemies are the world, the flesh, and the devil, and that his biggest worst enemy is himself. And he's really celebrating God's grace here. And this is a child, of course, who came from an outstanding Catholic family and the rest of it, but it's the warning of the culture. So the wokeness that you may be seeing among many homeschoolers is because it's everywhere in the culture. Part of the reason I wrote the essay, What Can We Do, is to say, look, this is inconvenient, it's nasty, you got to break from the culture because it will form you. It absolutely will form you. What we read, what we watch, what we do is going to form you. That's the way God made us. Mm-hmm. Aristotle was correct. Virtue is a habit, so are vices. And that's where we do see this. Now, the regime coming after homeschoolers, I think the good news is, one, a lot of the people in the regime, federal regime, state regimes, are often bright, but they're foolish in the sense that they're holding on to models of politics and economics that are no longer valid. They don't work. We see this especially with the Federal Reserve. The second good thing is they're going to have so many problems come crashing down on them in the next 10 years. I think homeschoolers are going to be way down the list.
All right,
we have pension defaults, public debt defaults. We have a sovereign debt crisis. Everyone's worried about the reset and we'll get the mark of the beast and all that sort of thing. The reason that they're talking about reset is they have a sovereign debt crisis that they can't get out of. They just can't, not without some sort of hyperinflation. So they would like to wipe the books. Yes, they would like to have a system whereby they could control and track transactions and things of this nature. But you're asking silent generation people and older boomers to figure out how to do that kind of a cryptocurrency system. Good luck. Mm-hmm. I mean, good luck. These people, if you watch, for instance, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, poor Joe Biden, one of the problems that they face is these are people in their upper 70s, early 80s, who really need to let go of power because their time is over, whether they were good, bad, indifferent, virtuous, or evil. It's simply over. They don't understand the world that they're trying to legislate for at this point. And they're way too tolerant, the baby boomers, to be honest with you. Yeah. So in lots of what we're going to see happening, I think, in the next 5 to 6 years is government is going to get overwhelmed with a number of problems, and the confidence in government, even on the left, I'll be so bold to make this prediction, confidence in government, even on the left, is going to begin to dissipate and wane. And that's why we're seeing such an overreaction from the people holding power today. They can feel the waning of that confidence. I mean,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, you, for instance, you can't even discuss voter fraud in the United States anymore. No. So when you begin to shut down those conversations and cancel people and things of this nature, that means that, that your confidence in the ability to shape the culture, shape the future and direction of the country is being undercut.
Yeah. I read somewhere recently, the propaganda wouldn't have to be so insanely over the top. It's constant gaslighting all the time to where you start actually kind of questioning your sanity, as if, am I the only person that sees the craziness going on? My kids joke about it. I have sons who are logical and they don't seem that upset about it. But then again, we don't watch a lot of mainstream TV, all the places we go are kind of like safe spaces. Our co-op doesn't have masks. Our church is like super underground.
Yes.
We do what we want, without, people bothering us. But it's so wildly over the top. So on one hand, the propaganda has to be that strong because they know the lies that they're pushing are just untenable and not based in reality. But then on the other hand, the cancel culture is really scary. And you have written back to your What Can Be Done Now, your Abbeville article as of late. It is certain that individuals will soon be purged from schools and employment due to their political and religious views. I mean, I think that is absolutely right. I think that's going to happen too. So it's like both of these things are happening. Like we're the low-hanging fruit, but also we're kind of in their way too. I mean,
Sure.
how are we going to balance this?
It's a good question. We're just in for very turbulent times and a whole lot of volatility.
Hmm.
It's going to be very, very difficult to make sense of things that are going on. Um, Purging of faculty is already going on very quietly. Lou Dobbs, I saw today, just lost his position because he had been a major Trump supporter on his show, what have you. We're going to see more and more of this type of thing. And this may sound flippant, we're going to see more of this until we don't. The issue is going to be, when will there be a reaction to this? And at the moment right now, because we have four elites that generally run the country. You have DC, of course, with the federal government, the communications and technological elite based predominantly out in the Northwest, the Hollywood entertainment elite, and then, of course, the financial elite. These people do live in closed bubble worlds, right? So let's say the cancel culture really takes off and goes forward. Teachers lose jobs. People like Dobbs are losing jobs. Folks are getting kicked off platforms. The cool thing about humans is we innovate. When Facebook came out, I warned all my students back in the early 2000s, don't use it, man. I mean, you are the product. They're going to sell your information. They're going to do all kinds of crazy things. They all thought I was an absolute loon. And then, of course, when it all happened, they didn't remember that I told them this. We have to start taping these predictions. However, the crucial thing was, and what people need to remember is that, okay, we have to build other platforms. We have to get our own servers, build into platforms that are independent. So at that point, it's really a choice of, well, do we cut them off from the grid? I mean, what are we going to do in those types of cases? But we also, at the same time, I think, have to begin to live our lives again. Think of the inordinate amount of times in the polls that have been done of people just using social media as entertainment. I was asking students, what's so great about 5G? How is 5G going to change the world? And these new Apple phones, like, oh, well, the old one had 2 cameras, the new one has 3. And it's faster. Well, it's faster to do what? The reality is that most of these technologies that people were saying, oh, they're so wonderful, they're so great. Yes, they're wonderful, great aspects about them. They're not that transforming at the end of the day. And they're piggybacking off of the old technology of oil and the electrical grid. And that's heartening. That means that there's room for some other true black swan to come out and completely overturn the situation that we find ourselves in. At the same time, I mean, it's an opportunity for us to build community again. Okay, so they ripped me off my platforms. Let me find other alternatives. Let me also begin to work with my local community. The cool thing about when empires lose power and the center begins to wobble and shake, local areas do have to pick up the slack. We see this with the fall of Rome, when the cities are falling to pieces, the Roman army can't protect them anymore. Folks start moving out to the countryside, to the villas. And then you have these counts out there who are like, okay, we got to pick it up. We got to find ways to organize a defense, ways to keep the infrastructure going. We have to do all those things. And what's cool is that over time, this whole new social order emerges. And so Christendom is built on essentially the foundations of the fall of Rome. We have an opportunity here to build, but it's a scary time. I mean, I can tell you very honestly, my teaching record is outstanding. Hardly anyone would even offer me a job. I'm Southern, I'm white, I'm male, I'm older, I'm a traditionalist Roman Catholic, on and on. I'm about as politically incorrect as you can get. You're just not going to hire me, and I have a paper trail. But I accept that. Okay, fine. That means that we have to do more creative things to the best of our ability to do them. The last thing that any of us need to do, especially when the purges come, don't be a victim. Let the left be victims. What we have to do is say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to begin to break away from the regime. But we have to secede in the heart first, even if it's inconvenient.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. My family and I, we're Orthodox Christian, and we often talk about like the days of martyrdom could even be at hand, but
Sure.
it doesn't matter. I think 2020 really was a silver lining overall, because we are forced to do all these things that I've been wanting people to do forever. We got to have community. We got to have these parishes where we all like live close together and we all know each other's names and literally hang out together all the time. We've got to really, who cares about Washington, D.C.? Let's get things fixed in our county, maybe even our state. You and
Yes.
I got work to do with our crazy.
Indeed.
But, you know, I'm trying to talk a friend into running for the school board as a home educator, just to like ruffle tail feathers and just get on in there and start doing something. In these alternative systems, these parallel institutions, they're not going to be easy. All you have to do is look at Andrew Torba at Gab and all that he's been through. But we're being forced to do it. So on one hand, it's like, hallelujah. Thank goodness, but it is, you mentioned this in your Abbeville speech. It is we might not ever see the fruits of that. Our children might not see the fruits of it. It's just the long game, right?
Yes, it is. And our problem with Americans, we have two major defects: avarice and impatience. So we just have to pull back on that a little bit and say, we have to play the long game. The left has done a very good job of playing the long game. And we have not. On the right, we have not done as good a job at that. And we were far too trusting of the institutions.
Yes.
You just look throughout the South, we have lost every single university, all of them. And we have lost them badly, and shame on us. Instead, we thought, hey, well, as long as I have a good football or basketball team, who cares? And some of these universities act horrendously dishonorably. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill had a huge cheating scandal with its athletes and barely got their knuckles wrapped about 5-6 years ago over it. That should have mobilized the alumni to say, wait a second, this is the Harvard of the South. We don't let those things go on. So we have a lot of work to do in, I would say, examining our consciousness and saying, okay, where do we have to go? Chesterton was once asked by a magazine, what's wrong with the world? And he said, I am. And that's a good place for all of us to begin and be good about beginning locally. In Catholic tradition, there's this idea of your state in life. And there are things that are certainly important for you to do in your state of life. You have these duties. But if you do those duties well, they're going to ripple outward because God's grace is going to magnify whatever you're doing very well. And I think Christians in particular have to always remember that as we're wiping a snotty nose or teaching a child to read or having that hard conversation with a young person, to say, no, I may not see where this ripple takes us, but it could be a very important ripple. It could have effects that begin to transform other parts of the world, other parts of the culture, things of this nature. So.
And when you were saying earlier that Christendom was, built on the falling Roman Empire, it makes me just reflect on some of my personal stuff. Like my prayer life has never been better. I have never been better at, reading the scripture daily. I still got work to do, but my point is, before it was like, oh, we're all busy and we're doing these things and we got baseball and we got all these things and, I'd get to it eventually. But now it's like, I think everybody is coming to see what's really important. I will say though that the boomers are interesting. You've mentioned them a couple of times. Yeah, I think that God bless them. My parents are still alive, but they're still kind of thinking, oh, in 4 more years, Supreme Court justices. I'm just, that ship has sailed. Come on, we got work to do elsewhere.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
All right, we're going to turn the ship, and I want the rest of this interview to talk, focus on economics. You had really hit so many big things happening because you're a stockjobber. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
So I want to, people's eyes kind of glaze over sometimes when you're talking about basic economics. The terminology, I don't know what's going on. They just kind of stop listening. So I want you to define a few things for us. And then I want to ask you about GameStop. So what is the difference between capitalism and the free market?
Very good. Capitalism in its most pure, limited definition is simply when an entrepreneur takes capital and he employs that capital in such a way that he will receive a return higher than his cost. Nothing more, nothing less. So I'm going to go, I have some capital in the form of currency, and I take that currency and buy a nice lawnmower, and I buy some weed whackers, I buy some other tools, and I buy a nice little thing to haul it behind me, and it costs me a certain amount. But in providing the service, a lawn service to my neighbors and to my community, I'm hoping to make a return that will be greater than my cost. I'm a capitalist in that case. So I'm employing capital for that reason. Capitalism can exist in any number of political systems. What has been really frustrating in economic debates is that everybody convolutes it. You have really brilliant authors who'll say, well, you can only have capitalism in a free market. Well, no, you can't. I mean, you have capitalism in any kind of situation. I mean, even in the most repressive Soviet regime, you still might have black markets, even if you don't, even in a centrally planned economy, you can have it. China right now, I mean, is anyone going to say that they're not using the kinds of calculations that capitalists use in their industry? Of course they are. So it can be done in any particular fashion. Some have said that, well, capitalism is tied into greed. It can be. I mean, you can have avaricious capitalists. You can also have capitalists who are doing wonderful things for their community and are socially responsible and all those other good things. So capitalism is nothing more than talking about a technique that you have capital and you employ it in such a way, invest it, and you are hoping to receive a return over and above what your costs are. The free market is something that's never really existed. And the reason it can't exist is because of the problem of risk.
Okay.
And everyone focuses on the profit. Oh, profits and innovation, this, that, and the other thing. Go back to our capitalist guy who's doing the lawn mowing and stuff. Now, if he's in South Carolina, he's got a business that's going to be a good 10, 11 months. But if he's in the North Woods of Maine, he's going to have to think of other ways to employ his capital. So he has enormous risk in this case. The greater you expand your business, the more infrastructure that you need to conduct the business, the greater the scale, the more risk you are taking on. And what often happens is that free markets don't stay free because at some point, a capitalist is going to say, I don't want to carry this risk. Now, the free market will say, great, we have insurance companies. They can insure you on your risk. All right, but that's expensive. How about if I can get people who don't necessarily buy my goods or pay for my services to pay for my risk? So an example there would, of course, be tariffs on automobiles. You know, I have not bought American cars for a while simply because their quality wasn't very good. And I grew up in the 80s. And so that's really when American automobiles just began to bottom out. And yet I had to subsidize the price of American automobiles through this tariff. Why? Because I was underwriting the risk that GM and Chrysler and others were taking in trying to develop automobiles that would compete with the other market. So the people who really don't want the free market, it's not just your communists or your socialists, it's your large capitalists. The last thing in the world that Microsoft wants is competition.
Right.
So you might be writing a new, wonderful, elegant operating system in your garage, and they will begin to sue you left and right for patent infringement.
Right.
You know, anything that they can do, any way that they can bring the judicial system down on you, any means fair or foul. Microsoft was funded enormously by getting into schools, government schools and government universities, and essentially funded off of taxpayer dollars. If you can get that gig, it's a wonderful thing. So the other curious thing about free markets, I know in Catholicism, there's a movement called distributism, and it has its adherents elsewhere. And the distributists often believe that, oh, it's the free market that is the problem. We got to go after these free marketeers. The businesses get too big and they drive out the mom and pop. It's like, no, actually, if you could get a free market, the businesses would stay small because nobody wants to assume the risk of trying to become a Walmart. The risk is simply way too high. So when Walmart comes to town, the first thing they do is they negotiate with the county or with the state for some kind of a tax break, some kind of an infrastructure break that puts them in a competitive advantage that allows them to undercut their opposition. So the real issue isn't whether we should have free markets or not. The real issue is, can we get government out of the business of favoring one industry over the other? So if you're going to pass economic regulation, or if you're going to pass subsidies, everybody gets the same thing at the very least. So the idea is really what you want to do is to try to stop political consolidation, because that is going to lead to financial consolidation. And this is where the left and the right kind of hit each other over the head. The left will be like, we need larger government to control these businesses. Well, what are you talking about? I mean, look at the Congress right now. Look at all the ties they have, the businesses doing business with China going back to the 1990s. I mean, they're in bed with them. So you have to sever that connection. And that was the genius of the Jeffersonians. Sever that connection, try to keep markets as free as possible. If we are going to do regulation, the regulation has to apply evenly to everyone. The burden has to be shared evenly by everyone. So that, in a nutshell, would be the difference between the two.
The consolidation that we have now would it be proper to call that industrial capitalism? Is that kind of how you would
Probably
describe
no
it?
more. I mean, because we don't have much industry. You could
Oh,
call
okay.
it financial capitalism. I would call it Hamiltonianism on steroids.
Okay.
Because essentially what Hamilton really believed, his main principle was government should partner with capital. His rationale was, if we ever go to war again, we're going to need these people to underwrite the debt. And this is what's often missed when Hamilton, people will focus on the industry, the manufacturing, tariffs, the subsidies, things of this nature. But Hamilton was very clear that he wanted large capital to finance the government and for there to be this symbiotic relationship. It's here. I mean, you know, J.P. Morgan is allowed to get away with murder. Yeah, they might get fined for manipulating the silver market, but it's a rounding error for the most part on their quarterly statement. The commercial dealer banks have enormous influence. You just look who's been Secretary of Treasury.
Right.
You look at the revolving doors in between government and corporations. So you have to break that symbiosis. And one thing you do is you limit government, extraordinarily limited, because then the temptation's not there. So if JP Morgan goes to the government and says, hey, we're ready to go ahead and buy all those bonds. Well, we're not selling any, you know? Or Ford is like, could you give us a tariff? We don't do that. That's not part of what we do. That will help break some of that in those cases. But I can tell you, if you read the captains of industry, Rockefeller, Carnegie, or the modern technocrats, they're all concerned about, we have to bring order to this situation. We can't have this free market chaos. Rockefeller was especially keen on this. He's like, we need to bring order to these markets. So your big time capitalist is probably leaning towards corporatism of some sort or other.
Okay.
And that's why these guys were attracted to National Socialism, communism, and fascism. It's like, oh, wow, we got some order here. And it doesn't really seem to be affecting large capital too much, except, of course, in the Soviet Union.
And when you're talking about Hamilton, would that be akin to the American system that Henry Clay spoke of, you know, where it was what, tariffs, increasing the general government and then a national bank? Is that kind of all the same thing? And then Lincoln put it more into action, or what?
Sure. I mean, there definitely is a genealogy there. The thing about the American system, it really was a system designed to do development and to have a central bank that would help fund these projects.
Railroads and stuff.
Yeah, Hamilton is actually a little bit more sophisticated than Clay, and a little bit more sophisticated in the sense that he understands that the real engine and he wants influencing the government is large capital that can finance government operations. He really badly wants that. I think Clay really and truly believed that, yes, this is the way that you're actually going to build and develop the United States and its infrastructure is through the American system of tariffs, tariff protection, internal improvements, and a central bank. The funny thing is we didn't need it. We did just fine with an independent treasury. We did just fine with tariffs that were receding after the 1830s. And we did just fine with internal improvements not having to be funded by the federal government. The economy grew. It just did. And but you know, it's so much easier to get that government contract, to get the taxpayers' money, than it is to actually take the kinds of risks in the free market that you would have to take. So large capital always has this temptation of, can we go out there and get the government, the taxpayer, to underwrite our risk whenever we undertake an operation?
Mm,
Military industrial complex is based on that,
right.
absolutely based on it. And so you end up with the weirdness where, of all people, the Russians have a better procurement system for their weapons systems than we do. So if you make the F-35, you have to make sure that a part of it's made in every different state, right, to get it politically through. The Russians, they just keep working off the same models and improving the same models over and over and over. And they can come out with generation after generation after generation of fighter aircraft, and we're still bickering about where the bolt's going to be made, what state gets to make the fuselage and all the rest of it. It's ridiculous, but there we are.
And you had mentioned distributism.
Mhm.
Is that necessarily like a Catholic thing? I know Chesterton was into it, but wouldn't you call maybe some of the agrarians distributists? Is there a little overlap there?
There certainly is overlap. I wouldn't say they're distributists per se, but I think they're operating off the same basic premise that a society that is both free and just is one in which there's a very wide distribution of property.
Okay.
The question is, how do we get there?
Okay.
And in my view, my fight bone that I would pick with distributists would be say, well, look, I can tell you right now, let's repeal some laws. If we repeal corporate liability, I mean, we'll see corporations shrink overnight. So if we can get rid of corporate shields, for instance, and begin to hold directors personally responsible and managers personally responsible for the decisions they make and the products and services that they provide, that would be a huge lift. Let's get rid of the tariffs. We'll go to a nice little revenue tariff of about 5-7%, a little value added thing, and leave it alone. It's whatever comes in, it's 5-7%. Nobody gets any favoritism in these cases. And the reality would be that we would end up with something that looks a lot like distributism or a lot like the agrarian society and culture.
Okay.
If we did those things.
I want to get into the GameStop thing and what even a hedge fund is, but how would you just define yourself economically, politically? You've mentioned Mises, but in the Abbeville lecture, you said you didn't agree with Rothbard on everything, so you're not Rothbardian. Right now my libertarian listeners' heads are exploding. What are you?
Let me say about Murray Rothbard. I love Murray Rothbard. I got to meet him right before he died, and he was a man of incredible erudition, a true liberal in the best sense of that word, willing to engage anyone in a conversation, what have you. What I am is probably, my politics are best described as an anti-federalist from the Tidewater. So John Francis Mercer, Patrick Henry, George Mason, I tend to align with them. I upset a lot of people because I think the Constitution was a terrible mistake. And I do agree with the leftists in this respect. I think a conflict model of US history does more to explain what we've gone through as a country. I just disagree with the leftists as to where the conflicts are. I don't think the conflicts are necessarily the conflicts between class, but the conflicts that arise over the Constitution, because so much of the Constitution was left undefined, so much of it was left vague. Things of this nature, and you just end up with constant bickering and dickering. If you had the Articles of Confederation, a Navy, and a 5% tariff to pay for it, we could have had that would have been a truly interesting experiment in government, if you want to look at these things as experiments in this case. Economically, I tend towards the free market. However, there are some things that I would get rid of, because I don't think limited liability is a free market innovation. Limited liability is a privilege that's given to you by the government. So let's get rid of that. And if we need liability insurance, insurance companies to provide liability insurance and things of this nature. So I tend to favor the free market, and I favor it because I think it would lead to a society that looks more like a wide distribution of property and a wide field for innovation. Because what we would do is we get the government out of the business of underwriting people's risks and, leaving people to themselves to be irresponsible because the government has their back. Just look at the stock market today. I mean, highest valuations ever by almost any measure, because they believe that a quasi-government agency, quasi-private firm, the Federal Reserve, has their back.
It's wild. It's just wild. Let's get into hedge funds. What the heck is a hedge fund, and what's a short squeeze?
Sure. The plain vanilla definition of a hedge fund is a fund that is designed to basically hedge your major investments. So what a hedge fund will do for you is, if they can do a number of things for you, and I'll just give you one example. If you have a hedge fund that's investing, say, in small capital companies, small cap stocks as they call them, these would be small firms, say small little tech firms and whatnot. They're going to hedge those investments by using short selling, using options, maybe buying calls on volatility, whatever it may be, to try to hedge their investment. So if you were to go to, say, T. Rowe Price or some mutual fund company and just invest in their mutual fund in small cap stocks, they're not necessarily going to have a large hedging position. So maybe 5% of the fund might be allowed to hedge their positions in these small cap stocks. In a hedge fund, there's no restriction. They might even decide, heck, we don't like small cap stocks for the next 6 months. We're going to short every single one of them that we possibly can. Now, a short squeeze. Should we talk about what a short is as opposed to a long?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
A short, when you take a short position in a stock, technically you're borrowing stock from somebody who owns it. And what you're promising to do is either buy the stock from them or return it back to them. What you get is the right to sell that stock at a price that is below the current price, because you think it's going to fall even further, right?
Okay.
Now, what happens right now, if we can segue right into what happened with GameStop, because that's a very good example of a short squeeze that everybody would be familiar with now. So a lot of hedge funds across the world were looking like, oh, look at GameStop. Who goes to a brick and mortar store to buy their kid games? The kid's downloading it from Steam, or they're on some Fortnite thing or other. They're getting it offline. So let's short this baby. So they began to go ahead and borrow stock left and right from everybody, and they began to short the stock. Now, here's where it gets weird. At one point, they had shorted 130% of the shares. So you might be thinking, well, wait a second. I'm just going to use a number here. If there's 300 shares of GameStop that's being shorted, how can you short more than 300 if that's all there is? Well, there's something called rehypothecation. Basically, you may be the owner of those shares, but you're basically giving the right to other people to go ahead and put short contracts on those same set of shares. This is done all the time. Supposedly, you are not naked short selling when you do this, because you say, look, the collateral's here. But there's 5 other people who can say, yeah, look, the collateral's here. So these people are very vulnerable. So what you do in a short squeeze is you get together with other people, or by yourself if you have lots and lots and lots of money, and you begin to bid the price of the stock up. And so remember, our guy had a price here, say GameStop at 4, a right to sell it at 3, and they start to see this gap grow. They now have to take some of their capital and begin to buy the stock because their contracts are losing value. So in order to hedge their loss, so you just end up having people, ironically, who expect the price of the stock to go down, having to join the bidding war and bidding the stock up to cover their contract to sell the stock at such a low price. And that's how these folks got squeezed. By the way, hedge funds do this all the time. Once upon a time, before investment banks colluded with each other, they used to do it to each other. If this were 20 years ago, I guarantee you Goldman Sachs' desk would have been after everybody who's shorting GameStop as soon as they saw the thing go up to 120% short position, because they're like, oh, these people are vulnerable. We're going to kill them. This is our competition. You don't see investment banks do that very often anymore. They have kind of a gentlewoman's agreement not to do it. But hedge funds do it to each other. It's been done in the silver market forever. I mean, the silver market has been one of the most manipulated markets. But by the way, they're all manipulated. I mean, if you're investing, you do have to understand that you are in a rigged casino. You really have to understand how the sharks operate in order to be able to profit off of that rigged casino. So the GameStop thing was brilliant. You had a bunch of people on a little Reddit server at Wall Street Bets. They all jumped in. They texted their friends, and before you knew it, hedge funds were bleeding billions of dollars. They just could not keep up, even as they were trying to cover their shorts.
Yeah, I mean, do you see it as kind of a David versus Goliath thing? Populist versus the man. So many people, I didn't even quite know what was going on, but I'm like, oh, Wall Street fat cats losing money, yay! That was just kind of my first reaction, and I think a lot of people are like that. And then Reason Magazine comes in to tell us how we're wrong, and all these people are like, you know, whatever, CNBC, these people are, oh, you don't really understand, this is very unethical. And I mean, how
Right.
do you see it? Was it kind of cool?
Listen, I'm not going to cry if these billionaires who have every advantage in the world take a
Right.
bath from time to time. I will shed no tears. But it's a mixed bag. Yes, on one level, it is the little guys getting together to do what the big guys have been doing forever and ever and ever. Secondly, I don't know about ethical or unethical because they're not trading on inside information. This was all public information available that this was the position that these people had taken. Let's go after the stock. Um, if we're going to start crying that, oh, well, this wasn't a decision based on fundamentals, well, goodness gracious, take a look at every stock index, every single value index, every way that you can measure value, whether it's the Buffett indicator, any number of ways, put call ratios for sentiment. This is nobody's making a decision on buying stocks and based on the fundamental values of these companies. So I don't think you can hit them there. However, here is the danger. The guys who run Wall Street bets, many of them are very, very sophisticated investors. They just really are. And they probably sold out once the price got up to 2, 3, 4, 5, and they sold their futures contracts. But you've got other people on Reddit who are extraordinarily unsophisticated. And I will use, for example, my barber. God bless her. My barber was telling me about stocks. And I said, oh, interesting. What do you own? I don't know. I just buy letters. You recall what the letters are or what companies they correspond to? No, I don't. But it kept going down. So I closed all my accounts. I said, well, that was probably wise. You're going to have a lot of people who bought GameStop at, $385, $390, et cetera. And yeah, there are other people in Wall Street bets who basically left them holding the bag. Now, is that ethical or unethical? I don't know. But I would simply say this, be very, very careful. It wasn't just people who are with pitchforks and torches in hands. Let's get the big guys. There's a lot of sophisticated people who were part of that short squeeze.
Okay.
And it doesn't always work. They tried to do it with silver recently.
Right.
They have forced a panic buy in the physical market. I mean, we're looking at, goodness gracious, premiums of 30, 35% to buy physical silver coin. However, there's no way they're going to compete with JP Morgan. The JP Morgan is too much capital. However, if you wanted to go after one stock, like First Majestic, for whatever reason, is heavily shorted, yeah, they're a good target. That's a place where you could get a bunch of people together to say, yeah, First Majestic we think is undervalued. Let's go ahead and squeeze it. And they did successfully squeeze it. The price went up from about $11 to I think $21, $23 a share for a short period of time. However, I would say this for the people at Reason Magazine who are worried about ethics, at the end of the day, these folks don't have the money to play. And good short sellers are the most sophisticated sharks in the water. If you have a company and your company is doing, and you're touting the company and it's doing well, it's $4 or $5 a share, up from maybe 50 cents after 2 years, and the short seller goes after you, he will beat you down into the dust. The best thing you can do is to bribe him to go away. Say, hey, how about this? We'll give you some shares. We'll offer you a particular offer at below market. If you'll just, take the shares and go away.
Wow.
They're very sophisticated short sellers are almost impossible to squeeze out of positions because sooner or later people are going to take profits. And you've seen what's happened to the price of GameStop recently, right? It's going to just be very volatile at this point. So yeah, there are going to be people who get hurt, and it's going to be the unsophisticated investor who gets in too late because they feared missing out.
So I want to kind of segue a little bit to Southern history, but I think it's it's a good melding here. You've written about John Taylor of Caroline and John Randolph of Roanoke. I went to your LinkedIn page and I was not able to read the stories, but I could tell by the headlines it had to do with economics. And my guess is, knowing some about their history, they were against kind of the tides of consolidation that you've spoken of, the mixing together of the political and economic power, right? Money and government.
Yes.
Do you see the push against the South, the demeaning of everything Southern, that, really slavery is just like this ancillary issue? Do you see it because Southern people have been so right on this for so long, from Jefferson, Calhoun, Lee, even, the agrarians, even if they were wrong a little. Do you see it as kind of like big picture? We have to squash these anti-Hamiltonians because they were so freaking right. Is that a thing?
In part, yes. There's a couple of things about this. One, the South is huge. It's a huge region. You're talking about everywhere from southern Delaware and Maryland, sweeping out to the Mississippi, down through Texas and Oklahoma. So you have a lot of Hamiltonians, a lot of Whigs, a lot of consolidationists in that pot as well. So it's not, the Jeffersonian position's not just a purely Southern position. It just so happened that the best articulators of that position were Southern. Secondly, in many respects, yes, Gene Genovese, who at the time was a Marxist when he wrote this, said, look, the political tradition, cultural tradition of the South is fundamentally conservative. For that reason, yes, your elites who view themselves as progressive, as forward-looking, moving forward, doesn't matter if we're about to go over a cliff, we're going to keep moving forward. These people generally revile the South for that reason. They also envy the South as well. I went to school at Mount St. Mary's University, so there were a number of Virginia, Maryland students, and students from upstate New York, Long Island stuff would come, and they had no doubt in their mind that we were Southern, and we were like very exotic to them. These hunting, fishing folks with their accents, and you could tell there was a certain amount of envy. They would tease us about that we all owned plantations. Like, look, nobody in my family's owned a plantations. 40 and on they would go. It's a thing that's been around for a very long time. I believe her name is Susan Grant, wrote a wonderful book called North Over South, where she traced this deep-seated prejudice and malicious hatred of Southerners that so many folks in the North had. And why it's been there, I think one reason is this, that yes, the South, guys like Randolph, guys like John Taylor, were seen as obstacles to America achieving its divinely appointed mission to basically enrich everybody. And how dare you Southerners complain about the tariff schedules? Don't you know that you're supposed to enrich us so that we can accomplish this great industrial revolution? There's that resentment. There's also the resentment, too, that Southern society was generally stable, satisfied with itself, ordered on custom. Well, in the 19th century, this is the age of scientific discoveries coming one on top of the other, where technology is really taking off. You Southerners have to get with it. You have to get with the world. And the Southerners provided, and I again rely on Genovese and Michael O'Brien here and some others, provided really powerful critiques in the 1800s of Northern society and Northern inequities. And they stung. So that was part of the hatred there as well, too. There's also in the Northern mind the problem of Puritanism. And Puritanism, being a form of Manichaeanism, always needs an evil principle to justify its existence. And so the South is that evil principle upon which you project all of your evil onto them. So a good example of this. So Yale University decides that John C. Calhoun, one of its most illustrious graduates, that the college name for him must be renamed. Horrors of horrors, the man owned slaves. He even said relations between whites and blacks under slavery were positive. Now, we can disagree with Mr. Calhoun on his owning of slaves, and we can certainly disagree as to whether or not those relations were positive. However, Calhoun is certainly one of the most brilliant political minds this country's ever produced, and a first-rate statesman. But what's really interesting is nobody's talking about tearing down the name of Elihu Yale off of that college. He's a slave trader. Or why aren't we going after the Browns? You know, why is Brown still Brown? So that's what I mean by this projection. You know, there's this kind of Yankee guilt that has to be projected onto the South in so many different ways and fashions. You people are racist. Yeah, but why did the worst riots occur in the 1960s in northern cities or southern border cities, not in the South? Well, it's because you're so racist, you know. Right. That's the weirdness that's in place. And there's a certain pathology there that is a mystery to me, to be honest with you. It's a terrible mystery. And maybe I can illustrate it this way, moving away from that particular conflict. So I grew up south of the Mason-Dixon line, and most Irish Catholics are north of it, right, in the cities and what have you. And when I began to run into more and more Irish Catholics from the north, I'm like, wow, these folks are really different than the Irish Catholics I've known in the South. And I stumbled upon Thomas Wolfe's book, Tom and the River. Wolfe had actually gone to Chapel Hill for school, and he fell in with a bunch of Irish guys from North Carolina, Low Country and Tidewater. And he had the best time of his life because he came from a very straight-laced Calvinist background out in Nashville, North Carolina. Well, Time in the River was in part about his time that he spent at Harvard University. So he goes up to Harvard, and Tom Wolfe decides that I will live with the Irish in South Boston, and I will have the best time of my life, because I had the best time of my life in the triangle within the triad with these guys and whatnot. So he goes up there and he's appalled. He's like, he's part of the most cruel, conspiratorial, clannish, Calvinistic, gloomy, vicious people I've ever seen in my entire life. And he's trying to sort this out. How can this be? I mean, these Murphys and other Irish guys that I knew were all just wild and hospitable and up for a good time and just full of life. And these poor these Southies in Boston are just, the life has been drained out of them. And he came to the conclusion that was, well, they drank deep from the draughts of Puritanism when they landed, and they grew up in cities. So the natural love of the countryside that should be in the Irish was completely beaten out of them. They had essentially been abused. That's a good example, because here, you know, Irish Catholics tend to be very tight with each other. And here's a good example of, yeah, I've noticed this in my own life, and I've met Irish Catholics from the deep north, and it's kind of like, wow, you're a lot different than the Irish Catholics I know in Richmond, Baltimore, or, you know, Norfolk or other places. It's a very different thing. And a lot of it is because the Puritans got there first. They secularized, which was a terrible mistake, but they never let go of their view of their election or their view of their own self-righteousness.
What did you say was a terrible? What did you say was a terrible mistake? You cut out for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. The terrible mistake was letting the Puritans settle during the colonial period, because they're people who, when they secularize, they never get over this idea that they are the elect, this self-righteousness, and, you know, their chief defect is hypocrisy. And we see it. We see it at the Ivy League. Yeah. Calhoun's name must come down. Yale and Brown, hoorah, rah.
Right. Heaven on earth, right? You know.
Oh, indeed. I mean, it's all of that. And they're still promising it. I mean, today's modern Democratic Party is the party of the technological elites, the financial elites, and the political elites, always promising us a utopia. Even as
great.
Can go down. Right, exactly.
It's awesome. Everybody's enjoying it.
It's really wonderful for them. I mean,
I don't know. They seem miserable too, but I guess they're always miserable, right?
Well, there will be a judgment. Perhaps they're getting older and they can contemplate that.
All right, we're going to start wrapping this up, because you had mentioned in the lecture some of the things we can do on top of the most recent essay you wrote that I'm going to link to. But one of the things you said as far as economics goes is to diversify across asset classes. Yes. I mean, kind of tell people what that means, and say a person has 10 or 27 $10,000 or $20,000 around. Okay, they just have it in savings. They want to do something with it. Should we buy farmland? Should we invest in gold, silver, Bitcoin? What are we supposed to be doing to kind of spend the dollar while it has some kind of worth? Not go in debt, but do something to kind of get us out ahead of this. What's your advice? What does diversify in asset classes actually mean?
Let me define that first, and then we'll talk about what a person could do.
Okay.
Oftentimes when you go to a financial planner, he'll tell you, oh, well, if you invest in this mutual fund and these stocks, the mutual fund has about, 65, 70 stocks that it invests in. So you're well diversified. Well, no, you're not. In market crashes, all the stocks go down. So you would want to hold your investments in a number of different areas. Cash should be one area. Another area would also be precious metals. If you like the cryptocurrency, I look at that more as a speculation. That's a conversation for another day. I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading on this. I don't think the cryptocurrencies are doing all the things that the adherents are claiming they're doing, but it's an interesting speculation. Real estate, of course, would be another possibility. Bonds are another possibility. And the idea is you want to get invested in things that are not correlated to each other. So for instance, if the market crashes, maybe gold goes down a little bit less, but maybe bonds do okay and cash will certainly not crash, though you do have the inflation risk with cash. So the idea is to distribute your risk across different assets that don't necessarily move in harmony with each other. Now, a person with $10,000 to $20,000, that's difficult to say. I mean, I would say this when it comes to, first and foremost, if you have unsecured debt, get out of it. This would be credit card debt. I even consider car debt unsecured because the darn car is depreciating so fast. Get out of those kinds of debts. If you have a mortgage, it might be a good idea to pay it down early, but at least the debt's secure. Just keep an eye on the housing markets are notoriously local. So just keep an eye on that local housing market and make a good decision, because houses are liquidatable. I would say this, don't buy a McMansion. I mean, the millennials will be the new home buyers. Get something small. They like small houses with smaller yards. So that would be a wise investment for the future. Millennials want nothing to do with McMansions, at all. Beyond that, I would hold some assets out of the system. So it's a good idea to have a little bit of cash in the house. You do not need to have piles and piles of it, but maybe 2-3 weeks worth if a hurricane comes through or something. And because even in a horrendous currency crisis, cash will be wonderful for at least a few weeks until it's not. If gold is not affordable, there's always silver. Right now, the premiums are disgustingly high because of the squeeze, but there are creative ways, to invest in silver. And there's wonderful advice on the internet about that. But gold is wonderful as well. I think that another thing that a person can do as they're going forward in particular is to invest in themselves. What are skills that I can cheaply invest in, credentials that I can get cheaply, or experience that I can get cheaply that may be an income stream? Right now, that would not be college degrees for the most part.
Yeah.
You could still do a college degree affordably. Many college states, you can go to community college, tech school for 2 years and transfer. But even then, if I were to go to UVA, I would not go in the humanities. I would look for a technical field.
Yeah.
And then you're still going to be treading around these minefields, these cultural minefields. Farmland, it depends. I mean, it depends on the quality of the farmland and what you are going to do with it and the cash stream, because 10 to 20 grand in Virginia might get you a quarter acre of it. I mean, if it's really prime farmland. But it's not a bad, if it can be afforded, it's not a bad thing. And if one has an interest in that, there are real estate investment trusts that do invest in farmland.
Right. The trust.
So those kinds of things are something that a person can certainly do. And the terrible thing is, Americans really would like to say with their money, okay, if I put the money into X, Y, and Z, I can go on autopilot, turn out the light, and everything's going to be just fine. You can't. You have to watch it and just make good decisions. Watch what the economy is doing, things of this nature, what's happening in the bond markets. We have a lot of information. There is some good information out there. But for instance, if I'm starting to see the yield curve steepen rapidly, oh, inflation may be around. Maybe I need to call my silver dealer and pick up a few more coins, that type of thing. It's just part of your household management now.
Yeah.
The old day of, hey, I'll get 5 mutual funds, just invest in that and go to sleep and sleep well. That day's over. And the reason that it's over is the baby boomers, who were this huge group of people that love to spend money, just stimulate the economy from the time they were babies all the way up. They're not spending anymore. I mean, your youngest baby boomer is what, 59 or so? They're all drawn off the system at this point. So that day's over. We're not going to see these huge pushes of the aggregate demand curve out to the right because our population's aging.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things to be aware of, but definitely don't put it all in one place. Folks who are putting everything into cryptocurrency when it was up to 42 grand got murdered, just absolutely killed. And then, you end up liquidating. So that's what the idea is, to invest across different sets of classes of assets that are not correlated to each other, so that if a crash were to occur, God forbid, you're going to preserve value somewhere.
Right.
In those cases.
And I think the term diversify, not diversity, but that's just kind of the way I think we all need to go forward with everything. Everything's this balance. You can't just do one thing anymore. My husband and I were talking about this the other day. He works in software and he's the breadwinner, but he's married to a neo-Confederate, so he may lose his job. So we're always thinking, what can he be doing outside of the box? Maybe in not the black market, but off the grid or whatever. Sure. I can be monetizing some things. The kids are almost of age, trimming lawns, he's teaching them how to code, all these things. Like, we cannot have our eggs all in one basket anymore, and any front anymore. And I think that's from talking to people like you and just all these interviews I do. It's a balance. It's not one thing anymore. It's many, many, many things.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, right now there is a major push, whether it's AI or robotics, to replace human workers in both blue collar and white collar jobs. And the reason that's going to be attractive is with the reinstatement of Obamacare. It's a big cost to buy that robot, or a big cost to install the AI, but you don't have to pay their healthcare costs.
Right.
And then, so the question will be, well, who's going to buy the goods and services? And we're seeing, it was Mr. Trump who took the first step of direct payments to Americans. So we've got a trend here and seeing where this is kind of going. And if you want to maintain a level of independence, you have to maintain independent income streams. You just do.
Yeah. And, you had mentioned during your Abbeville conference that the trades, that the average age is 55. Now, my kids can be replaced by a robot maybe eventually, but I don't know if they can work a lathe. Don't know if robots can do that. There's an artistry to some of these blue collar things that, white collar people poo poo. So that's where, I'm going to kind of be pushing my kids to do the trades, because that people need that kind of stuff. Those are things that even in, a depression, you still need plumbers, right?
You do. And you're going to have people in many instances. A good example, what will probably happen for carpenters and masons, large developers will use the robots. But when people want work done on individual homes and things of this nature, no. And the robots don't look to be scalable quite yet. It's incredible. You can watch the videos of these things build entire foundations and walls and whatnot. But they don't look to be scalable. There's weather issues. The other cool thing about the trades, and your robot's not going to be able to do electricity. You're not going to be able to do plumbing, those types of things. But they could put anesthesiologists out of business.
Wow.
Because you can monitor that. That's a very easily quantifiable thing. So you might have 2 anesthesiologists in the hospital instead of a full staff of 8.
Wow.
And it's slowly happening. It's happening as we speak. It's happening in the insurance industry for claims adjustment and things of this nature.
Oh my goodness.
It's already happened on the market. Most trades, when you're trading against somebody today, you're trading against an algorithm more likely than not.
Dystopia, man. It's crazy. Well, let's end on wonderful note. You had mentioned how we need to sow back in the homes, God and family, get out into nature, stop and slow down. My kids and I, we just recently read Fahrenheit 451. And one of the weird things about it was they drive so fast. And, they're always driving fast, and to be a pedestrian is a crime. And why? We were discussing this the other day. Why? Because they literally don't want you to stop and slow down and notice things. They don't
Sounds like Nova.
Yeah. And that is one thing that my family and I actually did. 2020, we said 2020 can sit and spin. We're going to go to battlefields. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go to states that don't have mask, hysteria. And we did that. And I think that people need to be doing that. And you had said, we need to kind of keep the flame alive and pass it on. Good history, logic for our kids, tell them not to rely on emotion. I mean, what else can you tell people of how they can prepare in the home and, getting right with God and putting their family first? Is it just as easy as doing that?
I think the very first thing you do is you get right with God. A rule of life, it's not just for monks. Even us lay people need that rule of life. And prayer, scripture reading, some meditative prayer. You don't spend hours and hours because we're lay people, we're in the world and what have you. But you have to do that. We have to connect there. Because the cool thing about meditative prayer is that it calms the emotions. It calms the rest of it. It allows the mind to rest in God. And that's a good thing. Secondly, it connects us with the eternal. Because everything that we see is passing. I mean, this is terrible for me as a conservative. I want to yell stop to the changes, right? But it is passing. And so the crucial thing for us is, hey, if my mind is right with God and it's resting in God, I can then identify the virtue. I can identify the good in just those daily tasks. The second thing is, what did God put in front of you today? What's the task in front of you today? And do that task well. Because it's oftentimes folks will often say, we'll make all these plans, we'll buy all these books, our energy starts spinning out of control. Just say, no, what's the task today? So maybe we take this book off the shelf, have a read with the kids, or we maybe go and do this type of thing. And then be patient with oneself. I mean, the terrible thing about human beings, since we're not angels and we don't have infused knowledge, we have to learn through the senses and all the rest of it, and it takes time. Just be patient and enjoy the journey. So much of this and so much of what's wrong right now in the right is that we probably lack confidence in God. We want something jump-started. We want a military coup. We want this, we want that. We got to figure out that we need to want what God wants at the particular time that we find ourselves in. And he permitted certain things to happen, and you made a great point. I mean, one wonderful thing about these lockdowns and the whole pandemic deal was that I've read more scripture than I've ever read before. Exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. So looking in those daily things, and everything else can fall into line. I actually had misgivings about that article, What Can We Do Now? Because I didn't want to make a checklist and think that, okay, here's your checklist, you better get all this checked. No, these are just suggestions of like, hey, given your own personal life and view, some of these may be good ideas for y'all to do. But if I had to leave it with one thing, I mean, make sure that relationship with the Almighty is absolutely strong. Because I do agree, martyrdom could be down the road, or may not. It may be a red martyrdom. It may be a white martyrdom. Many people are suffering the white martyrdom of job losses and exclusion and breaking of families over political disputes. So that is the ultimate relationship. That's what's going to calm us. And if we have the eyes on the eternal, we can do so much better for our communities because we can see the ultimate good of these things and build those relationships. And we begin to see people as people again, not just as adversaries or means to an end, which is how our adversaries often tend to look at people. So I think this thing, and here's the other thing. Let nothing take your joy. The one thing that the demons are so absolutely upset with, whether the demons are human or of the preternatural sort, they hate joy. They hate people to be happy, to live normal lives, bring normalcy back in, normalcy and stability. That's one of the great things about the conservative mindset and conservative principles is this emphasis on stability. That stability is really the foundation from which humans can then do wonderful things for each other. And I think that's where we really need to focus all the time, and not let so much of the world get to us.
Yeah.
I mean, all this will pass. I mean, that wonderful prayer of St. Teresa of Avila, let nothing affright you. All things are changing. God never changeth. I mean, that's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and you had used that Bobby Sands quote at your lecture, where it's what was it? They won't win if our children.
Well, there were two quotes. One quote was that our revenge will be the laughter of our children.
Yes.
And the other quote was,
Yes,
it said that there's nothing in the entire imperial arsenal of England that will break one Irishman who doesn't.
Yeah. And those are powerful, especially that Bobby Sands one. You know, he was a little wild-eyed, but that is so true. You know, that's so true. And, you know, I see good Christians I know, strong in their faith, but they are just experiencing despair. And it's like,
Yes.
Man, you just gotta, you can have righteous anger. You can be mad. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, all we control really is ourselves. You know, that's it.
This is very, very true.
All right. Well, I could just keep talking to you, sir. You are just chock full of information, and I would love to have you back sometime. But thank you so much. I cannot wait to share your video so everybody can hear about who owns all the farmland and all that. Oh my gosh, it was mind blowing. But I thank you so much, and just God bless you for all the work you do. And you know, I consider you just a wonderful man, and I just feel blessed that you were on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. I enjoyed our conversation, and God bless you as well.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Take care now.